Hello and welcome to my weekly podcast video, Stuff You Didn't Know About. Well, those of you who follow my podcast know that I often take detours. I usually come back around and finish them eventually, but it can take years. I will try to finish up Acts sooner than later, but today is the first Sunday of Advent. Advent are the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas, and so I want to make a brief detour for these next few weeks and do stuff you didn't know about the birth stories in Matthew and Luke. Or maybe you did know them, or maybe you disagree. But today I want to start with stuff you didn't know about Matthew's genealogy. The Gospel of Matthew begins with the family tree of Jesus. And so a lot of people probably don't pay much attention to the family tree, but there's some meat in there, some really good stuff. And so I just want to spend a few minutes in my podcast this week on stuff you didn't know about Matthew's genealogy. And you can both listen to this podcast from my Patreon site, patreon.com/Ken Schenk, or you can also watch the video with the PowerPoint going along with it on YouTube, at my YouTube channel, Ken Schenk. So, stuff you didn't know about Matthew's genealogy, or maybe you did know it, or maybe you don't agree. First thing, I think it's worth noting that Matthew has nothing to say about Jesus' preexistence. We know about Jesus' preexistence because of the Gospel of John. If it weren't for the Gospel of John, it's interesting. Marvel Comics has a series called What If? What if this had happened? What if Thanos had won? That sort of thing. What if the Gospel of John wasn't in the New Testament? It is an interesting thought experiment. Of course, God put John in the New Testament. God was intentional about what books he led the church to say should be in the New Testament. There was a debate for several hundred years. You may not know this. It probably wasn't until the late 300s that there was general agreement about what books should be in the New Testament. Gospel of John, of course, was agreed upon from very early on. And so God directed the fact that John would be in the New Testament, and therefore God directed the church to affirm the preexistence of Jesus, a very early affirmation of early Christianity. But if we didn't have John, what if the Gospel of John wasn't in the New Testament? It would be interesting to know how the debate would have gone along about the preexistence of Jesus, because Matthew may give us a couple hints here and there, but by and large, the Gospel of Matthew doesn't have anything to say about Jesus' preexistence. So that's the first thing I just wanted to note. The highlight of the genealogy of Matthew is that Jesus is the son of David. Now, most scholars think that Matthew used the Gospel of Mark as a source, and in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is the Son of God. Now, of course, Jesus is the Son of God in Matthew too, but the emphasis in Matthew is from the beginning. You start off with introductions tend to highlight what the book's about, right? Tend to focus on the big points. And the genealogy clearly focuses on the fact that Jesus is the son of David. What David are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about King David in the Old Testament. And this is important because it suggests that Jesus is a candidate for Messiah. The anointed one most Jews, I think, who lived at least in Palestine, would have assumed that if the Messiah is going to come, he is going to be from a descendant of David. And so Matthew 1 highlights the fact, yes, in fact, Jesus is the son of David. He is, in fact. His resume allows him to be king. Now, this is obvious to us, but of course, Jesus was from Nazareth, and it may not have been obvious to all Jews at the time. Well, wait a minute, how can he be the Messiah? He's from Nazareth, and the Messiah has to be a descendant of King David, right? And so this genealogy is important because it establishes Jesus' bona fides as a candidate for being the Messiah, the King of Israel. And this genealogy screams, Jesus is the son of David, which is not just a family tree. It's not just a nice genealogy thing. It is a royal title. Jesus as the son of David is a royal title. I didn't look it up, but I'm pretty sure that the Dead Sea Scrolls also, there's a fragment called 4Q Florilegium, Florilegium, that I believe highlights also that the Messiah would be the son of David. So Jesus is the son of David is the key point of the genealogy. I think that the Gospel of Matthew, more than any of the Gospels, has a Jewish Christian audience in view. I sometimes have said in New Testament survey that Matthew is the most Jewish Gospel, and I realize that, you could say, well, wait a minute, what's un-Jewish about Mark and Luke and John? But I reflected a little bit on that this morning. I decided not to put that in the PowerPoint, most Jewish Gospel, but I think I could defend that because I think Mark is a very Gentile-oriented Gospel. Luke would seem to be a more Gentile-oriented gospel. And believe it or not, the Gospel of John, in some respects, strikes me as a more Gentile-oriented gospel. Again, that's not what this video is about, and this podcast today about. But, you might say, well, wait a minute, isn't Mark, a Jew? Isn't John definitely a Jew? Luke probably is a Gentile if it's Luke that's the author. Anyway, I'm going to leave all that aside. I will say that Matthew most clearly has a Jewish Christian audience in view. The concerns of Matthew are those that are more traditionally Jewish. And I welcome any conversation you want to have, either on my Patreon site or on Facebook or on YouTube if you want to debate or discuss that. So anyway, Jewish Christian audience. And so the genealogy of Matthew 1, I think, would have been deeply of interest to a Jewish audience. Luke has a genealogy as well, but it's a different genealogy. For one thing, Luke's genealogy goes backwards. It goes all the way back to Adam, which fits the fact that one of the themes of the Gospel of Luke is that the Gospel is for everyone. Luke focuses on the universality of the Gospel message. The Gospel is for the ends of the earth in the book of Acts. Again, this goes along with what I've talked about, Luke having more of a Gentile kind of audience, perhaps, in mind. Matthew is the most Jewish gospel, I would say, although I realize it's problematic for me to say that. But the genealogy of Matthew is very much focused on that which would have been interest to a Jewish audience. Now, here's something you may not have known about Matthew's genealogy. The number 14 appears regularly in Matthew 1. There are 14 generations from Abraham to David. There are 14 generations from David to the exile, and there are 14 generations from the exile to the coming of Jesus. 14, 14, 14. What's so big about the number 14? Well, you may know that in in some Jewish thinking, numbers have meanings. Numbers can be symbolic. You may not know that they did not have separate symbols for numbers in the ancient world. And so what you did is the letters doubled as both letters and numbers. And so if you take the name of David, which is a DVD, David, the Hebrew did not write the vowels by and large, and so Dalet, Vav, Dalet is how you would write David's name. And so you add those up. David is, Dalet is the fourth letter, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Vav is the sixth letter, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. And so if you add 4, Dalet, plus Vav, 6, plus Dalet, 4, 4 plus 6 plus 4 is 14. And so the number of David's name, the number of the Antichrist, or it's actually, Revelation doesn't use the word Antichrist, the number of the beast's name is 666 in the book of Revelation. The number of David's name is 14. And so by grouping the names in Matthew 1 into groups of 14, the genealogy shouts, David, David, David. And again, Jesus is the son of David. Jesus is the son of David. Jesus is the son of David. The genealogy does that. This practice is called gematria, of using numbers in a symbolic kind of way. I might add, and here I'm getting a little ahead of myself in my bullet points, that there probably are some names missing. So, for example, if you compare the genealogy in Chronicles with this genealogy, there are, I think, 3 names missing in the last 14. Similarly, if you consider a 50-year generation from Abraham to David, there would seem to be probably some years missing. That's okay. I'm not in any way accusing Matthew of an error. In fact, I'm accusing us of an error we often err by assuming, no, it has to be done this way. If it doesn't have all the names, it's an error. Well, who said? That's your problem. That's not the Bible's problem. The Bible can skip the names if it wants to. Deal with it. And so I'm not in any way accusing the Bible of any problem. I'm rather pointing the finger at us and saying, sometimes we insist, no, I'm going to shove my preconceived notions down the Bible's throat. No, there's no problem with Matthew skipping some names in the genealogy. It's a problem, our problem, if we think that's a problem. And so there are probably some names missing from the genealogy. It's because David wants to, or Matthew wants to bring out the symbolism of this 14. And so there's absolutely no problem there. But I just wanted to mention that there probably aren't all the names in the genealogy. One of the great features of Matthew 1 genealogy is that women are highlighted. There are 5 women who are highlighted. This would be highly unusual. Women don't usually get any right of claim in ancient Jewish genealogies. The Gospel of Luke will especially bring out the significance of women in the story. And of course, this is one of the great features of Christianity, the empowerment of women and the showing that women had much greater significance than the ancients in general thought that they did. But there are 5 women highlighted in the genealogy, and what's interesting is they all have something that would have been somewhat suspect about them. Again, there's a theme of redemption here, and there's also a theme of you don't know everything that you think you may know, you Jewish culture or whatever culture. But notice Tamar. Remember, Tamar is the one that dresses up like a prostitute and gets Judah to sleep with her so that he'll keep his duty to raise up seed for his son that died. Her first and second husband were sons of Judah. Judah's afraid that his only remaining son will die too, so he doesn't give his youngest son to her, even though it's his duty. And so she dresses up like a prostitute. He visits her, and then she has a son by Judah himself. But anyway, apparently God has no problem with openly proclaiming that Tamar is in the line of Jesus. What about Rahab, who ran a house of prostitution in the wall of Jericho? God apparently has no problem with saying that Rahab is in the genealogy of Jesus. This is the only place where we hear about that. Ruth was a foreigner. She was an immigrant. She was from another country. She was a Moabitess. She wasn't a pure Jew, a pure Israelite. Apparently, God has no problem with integrating foreigners and immigrants into Jesus' genealogy. Bathsheba, interestingly, the genealogy says the wife of Uriah the Hittite. But again, focusing on, there's a allusion to the inclusion of the Gentiles here, right? Because she's the wife of a Hittite. And so God is okay, apparently, with people who aren't from home, the hometown, people who are from somewhere else. God apparently is okay with that. And of course, David has an affair with Bathsheba. Now, that son dies. Solomon is not that son. Solomon is a later son of David and Bathsheba. But again, this suspect woman, apparently it's okay. And when we get to Mary, of course, we think so highly of Mary. And I totally believe that Mary was an incredibly virtuous and godly woman. However, no doubt there was some grumbling in Nazareth. Do you know that she got pregnant before they were officially married? No doubt Jesus, actually, I don't know this for sure, but Jesus may have grown up with people saying, I'm not sure about this Jesus. I'm not sure that Mary and Joseph weren't together when that happened. Basically, the inclusion of these women in the genealogy of Matthew 1 smashes all of our pretense to purism and to say, well, I'm better than you are because I come from the right family, or I come from the right place, or I don't have any sins in my past. What does Romans 3:23 say? All have sinned and are lacking the glory of God. That means me, that means you, that means everybody. None of us is better than any other on the basis of our past. But when we come to Christ, we are all equally clean, whether we are foreigner, whether we are immigrant, whether we are local, whether we come from the right family, whether we were wealthy, whether we are poor, doesn't matter. We all come to Christ the same. We all receive the Spirit the same. We all become equally pure before the cross of Jesus Christ. Well, notice that Jesus is descended from the kings of Judah. Again, check that off the list. He has the right resume. He can be king. Well, this has been my attempt to talk about some features of Matthew 1's genealogy that you may or may not have noticed before. We are going to be, Lord willing, doing this path for the next few weeks as we go through Advent and into Christmas. Stuff you didn't know about the birth stories of Jesus in the Gospels.